The White Priest by Helene Eugene Alexandra Gingold. Read by Bethina. Part 1. When Lady Fotheringay invited me to spend a few weeks at Fotheringay Castle in the autumn of 18 I accepted with pleasure, being overworked and brain-weary, and lost no time in packing a few traps, and was soon on my way to the hospitable roof of my hostess, who was also, by the by, a distant relative of mine. I arrived a good hour before dinner-time and was shown to my room. There was always one kept in readiness for me by an old butler who had known me as a boy. This servitor was quite a character in his way, and was accepted by the servants as a sort of superior being. He was a cold, severe-looking man with a clean-shaven face and hair austerely brushed, but he had a soft spot in his heart for one I knew, not for me particularly, but another. Whilst he unpacked my clothes, I leisurely began the operation of shaving by the waning light. "Is my lady well?" asked I, stropping my razor well with my face covered with soapsuds. "My lady is well, Mr. Harwood," briefly responded Crisp, for such was his name. "Is the house full?" I inquired again in that peculiar tone which a man who is shaving can't help. "Pretty full." He began brushing a coat. Then he added with sudden interest, "Miss Angela is well, and oh, Mr. James, the most beautiful lady in the world." Miss Angela Fotheringay was the only being in the world the surly old servitor loved. She was his idol, and mine. And although I was in holy orders, my heart belonged to Angela, my hostess's daughter, and this Mr. Crisp knew very well. He liked to tease me. "There isn't a gentleman who isn't in love with her," he said, and then left me to my own meditations. When the first dinner bell rang, I descended to the drawing-room and found Lady Fotheringay and some ladies and gentlemen whiling away the time before dinner in different ways. She received me, as her wont, with the utmost cordiality, and bade me sit beside her. The company did not impress me particularly. There were the usual languid, pale-faced, listless young men, and the same amount of whalebone-waisted artificial young ladies to keep them in countenance. In one corner, under a huge palm, stood a bald-headed scientist expounding his doctrines to a tall and handsome young man, who every now and again said "Yes, yes," as though he understood it all. One of the palm leaves tickled the scientist's bald pate, and every now and again the scientist's finger would scratch at his bald pate until it was quite red. The hum of conversation was at its loudest when the door opened and Angela, clad in white, entered. Never had I seen anyone half so beautiful, and so the rest thought too, for first there came a hush, followed by a murmur of admiration. For beauty appeals to the dullest, where intellect and genius can appeal in vain. Lady Fotheringay looked with pride on her blooming young daughter, and who knows what schemes for her afterlife flitted through her ladyship's ambitious brains. Angela laughed merrily as she greeted me. "How very solemn you look," said she, as she pointed to my black frock coat and clerical-looking collar. "Not so solemn," I returned, "but that your presence and laughter melts my heart into love and joy." Needless to say, this was said in a whisper. Angela's beautiful cheek blushed a deeper hue, and I dared to think that she thought kindly of me. "By the by, James," said her ladyship afterwards, "when you want to do any writing, the library is always free. You will scarcely find anyone here now who will trouble the bookcase much. This she added with what may be called society sarcasm. Lady Fotheringay was a good-humoured, good-looking and well-read woman of 50 or thereabouts, and a widow. The dinner passed off as most dinners usually do, and the conversation was neither so brilliant nor animated that I need record it. Afterwards the ladies gave us a little music in the drawing-room, and even that seemed too much. Stay, maybe, the natural beauty of Angela Fotheringay made me draw invidious comparisons. Her very speaking voice was music, methought. Why did those women sing and so hush her? But the story of my love is not that which I have sat myself down to write. It is of something stranger, something sadder. The day following my arrival at Fotheringay Castle, I had the happiness of walking in the grounds alone with Angela, and in her hesitation, her blushes and smiles, read that her fresh young heart would be mine if I proved myself worthy of her love. The day passed like a glorious dream. So did a week after that, and then Angela caught a feverish cold, and I was in despair, for they would not allow her to leave her room. Crisp, the surly old butler, informed me in so many words that I had no business to take Miss Angela out in the grounds at such a season, and that it was my fault. I listened to him in gloomy self-reproach, and resolved to absent myself as long as compatible with the common laws of politeness from the rest of the guests, until Angela recovered sufficiently to take her place amidst them. It was at this time that I bethought myself of Lady Fotheringay's invitation to go in the library when I wished to write. It was always free, she said, and the castle was so full of people, it was really difficult to find a room where one could have peace. The old library, I recollected, was pleasantly situated, overlooking the finest portion of the grounds, where the ancient trees grew thickest, and where the light laughter of the guests could not penetrate. I felt too nervous and wretched to read and write in my own room. The library was just the place. Here, perhaps, Angela would come to see me when they allowed her to leave her room, and here I would tell her, perhaps, how sad and lonely I felt during the time of her illness. It was a dull afternoon, late in October, when I betook myself to the library for the first time since many a long day. The surly Crisp, taking compassion on me, brought me the news that Angela was better and might be allowed to come down afterwards for a little while. I slipped a guinea into his hand, but to my amazement he put it back on the table, saying quite deferentially for him, "For anything else, Mr. James," he called me Mr. James when he was good-humoured, and Mr. Harwood when he was vexed, "but not for telling you Miss Angela is better. You see, that news to me was worth £20. And making a momentary feint of arranging the folds of a curtain, he left me to my own meditations, which were now joyful enough. I sat near a table on which several books lay, and I reached out my hand for one of them, thinking by reading a little I would become more composed, for the anticipation of beholding Angela once more strangely unnerved me. In a haphazard way I opened the book, not caring whether it was fiction, travel, or science. It proved to be neither. It was the Holy Scriptures. In a dreamy way, yet knowing precisely what I read, my eyes rested on one of the Psalms of David. I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, "Blessed are the dead." I read no more, for suddenly I felt my limbs tremble violently, as if stricken with ague, and it was with quite an effort that I pulled myself together. Surely, I thought, I am not going to be ill. No, my pulse throbbed regularly, and the beating of my heart was normal as its wont. The trembling passed over. I looked out on the dreary landscape. The leaves were falling thick and fast, and already the trees began to look bare and black in the cold twilight. I wondered what time it was, and went to the mantelpiece to consult the ancient clock there. But I fell back a step in surprise, for standing near the fireplace with his head resting on his left hand and his elbow leaning on the black marble, stood a handsome young man. I did not hear him enter the room, and I concluded that my mind was too preoccupied to have heard his footsteps. I noticed with no little surprise that his tall, elegant figure was clad in a cassock of dazzling whiteness, and that in his right hand he held a missal richly jewelled. His face was not only handsome in preeminent degree, but possessed of a fascination and strength which even I was not proof against. His bright hair waved round his head almost like a golden cloud, and in his deep sapphire eyes beamed a steady light of nobility, and suffering too, that made me think of the martyrs of old, nor can I tell why I thought so. His mouth was sweet and gentle, yet firm withal, and a peculiar smile hovered round the corners. It seemed to me that he repressed an inward agony, and yet I cannot assign any reason for thinking this. I wondered silently who he was, and then it struck me that he was a new arrival, and his extraordinary dress a fancy one. I forgot to mention that Lady Fotheringay resembled Madame Lebrun in her liking for theatricals, masquerades, etc. Charades were going on nearly every night, and it was by no means an uncommon thing to find a zealous charada promenading the castle in his or her get-up in the afternoon. Attracted and fascinated, I bade the newcomer good evening, and reseated myself, hoping to have a conversation with him. He gently inclined his head, and seemed to wait for me to address him first. "You are a new arrival," I observed hesitatingly. "I have not hitherto had the pleasure of seeing you here." "The castle is not new to me," he answered gently, "and I never recollect to have heard any voice like his voice before." "Are you staying long?" I asked, almost timidly, nor can I account for this either, as I am neither of a timid nor nervous disposition. "It depends." "Have you long been acquainted with Lady Fotheringay?" "Yes." Although he answered briefly in words, his manner interested me more and more. "You doubtless know Angela Fotheringay," I said, "and admire her?" And I looked at him and thought with a pang of sadness at my heart how Angela must be interested in this handsome and fascinating stranger. How could I have a chance now? She would fall in love with him. I could bear comparison with most young fellows, but not with this extraordinary being. She would not be able to help herself. The stranger seemed to read my thoughts, and a strange, sad smile hovered round his lips, which touched me in an unaccountable way. "I have seen Angela Fotheringay," he answered, "but she has not seen me, and," he added firmly, "she must not. You must prevent her." I marvelled more and more. "You are vain of your appearance, unfortunately for me, with reason," I said bitterly. "Vanity has no part of me," he returned, looking at me with his penetrating and suffering eyes, which seemed to read my inmost soul. "You are more than mortal, then?" I asked with something of scorn. "I am the White Priest," answered the young man gently. "That may be," I observed coldly. "And tonight, if I were asked to take part in a masque, I should probably be King Richard Coeur de Lion or Rameses of Egypt." "Come," said my companion in a frank manner, "you look too kindly natured to be bad at heart. I wish to be on good terms with you." "I have to ask your pardon," I rejoined, all my ill humour evaporating under the magic of my companion's gentle and charming address. I am or was jealous, and with good reason. But one thing strikes me as strange. How is it you are staying here, and yet do not wish Angela Fotheringay to see you? And yet again, I beg your pardon, I really have no right to pry into your secrets. He had not moved from the position by the mantelpiece, his beautiful head leaning on his hand, and I sat looking at him earnestly. I could not take my eyes off him. "You are intended for the church?" he asked presently, and when he spoke it was not as if my ears were addressed, but as though he spoke straight into my heart, and that my heart listened. I nodded affirmatively. "And you will be able to act deeds of charity, love and patience, and then preach it to mankind." "Fortunate man!" he exclaimed in tones whose earnestness it would be impossible to describe. "You are a born actor," I murmured. "In life we all are," he said. "It is only after death that our spirits, freed from the mask of clay, become real." At this conjuncture the dinner bell rang, and remembering that I had not changed my dress, I apologised hurriedly and left the room, intending to resume the conversation afterwards with my handsome companion. At the threshold stood a slight, beautiful figure, which I joyfully recognised as Angela's. Seizing her delicate hand, I kissed it warmly, assuring her how more than happy I felt to see her downstairs again. Tell me, she cried in a strangely excited tone, and not noticing my delight at seeing her. "Who is that young man dressed as a priest to whom you were speaking?" In her agitation she laid one hand on my breast, and looking into my face with kindling eyes. My heart sank and groaned within me. I knew how it would be. That accursed stranger had won her heart by his extraordinary beauty, but seeing that excitement would only harm her, I smothered my own resentment as best I could and soothed her and told her he was a newcomer. Bubbly, I added with pardonable sarcasm, a wolf in sheep's clothing. There were to be some tableaux vivants that night, and many guests had been invited besides those staying under the roof. I sat next to Angela amongst the audience, and never had I seen her look so animated and beautiful. Cold had left her countenance a trifle thinner, giving it a more spirituelle expression. The curtains that screened the performers from view were drawn aside to some sweet music and disclosed to the admiration of all beholders a handsome young man dressed in white, holding in his left hand a jewelled missal, and with his head gently leaning on his right hand in the same fashion as I had seen him do in the library. The limelight, for there was a raised platform and everything arranged perfectly, shone full upon his fair young face, showing it to the best advantage. The pose was excellent, and the figure almost matchless in its grace. The applause burst forth, and I looked intently at the young man and then at Angela, for the colour had fled from her cheeks, and she appeared sad and downcast. The clapping of hands and the murmurs of approbation were at their height when I turned to the fair girl at my side and said, "What ails you, dear one? Tell me." "I do not know myself," she answered sadly. "But that young man, is not the same one whom I saw speaking to you in the library." Then she added, shivering convulsively, with a hectic flush spreading over her face, Promise me, James, that I shall see him again." She had fainted, and I bore her from the place in my arms and carried her to her mother's room and gently placed her upon a couch. I did not leave till she had regained consciousness, nor was I asked to do so. And when at last she dropped into a gentle sleep, I whispered, "Lady Fotheringay, what was that tableau supposed to represent that disturbed Angela so?" "A foolish legend of Fotheringay Castle. A certain priest is supposed to have committed some offence and is doomed to wander through ages." This is what Lady Fotheringay told me, and of one thing I am convinced and positive, and that was that the young man I had met in the library and the young man I had seen in the tableau vivant were not one and the same person. When I entered my bedroom that night, full of anxious and distracting thoughts, Crisp, the old butler, pushed past me. He threw open the door for me to enter, a most uncommon act of civility on his part, and assisted me to undress with a sort of gruff sympathy in his manner. "Mr. James," he said at last, tucking me in, as he had done when I was a boy from college and had come to the castle to spend my holidays. "Good night, and God bless you, my friend," I answered sadly. "God bless you, and have mercy on this unfortunate house," he ejaculated, "and have mercy and pity on her, so young, so young, so young." And with tears streaming from his old eyes, he left me to myself and my night's thoughts. Part 2. During the next 3 days I shunned the library and wandered about the castle like a restless spirit in search of I knew not what. Angela was once more confined to her room, not seriously ill, but suffering from nervous prostration. Her medical attendant said she had been allowed to leave her room too soon after her severe cold, and that excitement had done her more harm than good. Crisp was my Mercury, and gave me news of my darling almost every half hour. I wrote her a little note, which my Lady Fotheringay took herself. When I met her at lunch-time, my hostess gave me another, saying with a smile, "Angela is better. She has written you a few words in answer to your note, and the naughty child would not let me see what it was. Here it is." She handed me a paper folded in that intricate way that only young girls are masters of, and turned to another of her guests, perfectly satisfied that her child was making satisfactory progress towards recovery. I opened the note with a misgiving at my heart and read, "Thanks, dear James, for your many kind inquiries. I am better. I shall come down this afternoon. I pray you to find out who was that you spoke to the night I came downstairs. Believe me, it is not idle curiosity that prompts me to ask this of you, but some feeling which I cannot account for. I pray you most sincerely and sadly not to think me heartless or cruel or flippant. My whole heart is full of sorrow for you and the injury I have done you, yet unwittingly. Angela." Crushing the paper in my hands, the room and its occupants swam round me, and I had to catch hold of the table to save myself from falling. Now autumn had indeed crept over the summer sunshine in my heart, and I knew that Angela's love was no longer mine. Had she been another than she was, I could have met her rejection with scorn, for I am not one who can humbly love without being loved in return. But she was so different to others. Did she not write, "I pray you most sincerely and sadly not to think me heartless, cruel, and flippant"? Some terrible fascination held her soul enthralled, which even I, man as I was, could not shake off. I allude, of course, to the young man I met in the library, whose name I did not know. I am happy in thinking now that I nursed no bitterness against Angela, whose nature was so like her name, and whose flesh seemed more of air and heaven than earthly clay. One thing I was determined to do, and that was to try and seek out the young man. Composing my feelings as best I could, I even managed to indulge in light conversation at table, wondering in my heart of hearts how I could do it. At about 3 o'clock that afternoon, Angela, in a long white gown trimmed with some airy lace, made her appearance in the morning room, where her mother and a few of the guests were sitting. She entered, leaning on the arm of Crisp, and followed by the maid bearing a heap of white shawls. When she sat, or rather sank, into a large armchair, she was surrounded by a bevy of admiring sympathisers. She smiled, but me, I noticed not in her old glad way, and although appearing to listen with interest, her large eyes continually turned towards me in a mournful way, quite unlike her former self. How bright and dilated her eyes seemed, and I remarked with pain that they were surrounded with black circles. "Come here and join us, James," she cried at last. "Why are you sitting so far away? Have I a fever that you are afraid of catching it?" She added this with childish petulance, which would have sounded harsh in another, but was charming in her. I did not answer, but drew my chair nearer. "Mother," she said to Lady Fotheringay, when the conversation had become pretty general, "I am going to claim that privilege always accorded to invalids, and ask one of you to read to me, and the rest to leave me. I am not amusing when I'm ill." "Darling," interposed her fond mother. "Don't please think me disagreeable, but I want James to read to me," said Angela. "And, mother dear, look after our friends. Besides, I want to talk secrets," she added laughingly. She was a spoiled child, but as innocent and pure-minded as one of her namesakes. Alas, how soon the purest-minded are affected with deceit. Her light laugh deceived her mother, but not me, and followed by the rest of the company, the good-natured mother withdrew, exacting a promise from me that I would not allow Angela to excite herself. "You had my note?" she asked timidly when we were alone. I answered, "Yes," quietly, and she did not know how pained I was at the recollection of it. "Have you nothing to say to me further?" she continued hesitatingly. "Nothing, Angela, nothing," I returned with a little bitterness. "You have chosen an entire stranger to one who has known and loved you as a boy. So what should remain for me to say? All the words in the world will not alter it. The love I offer will not make you return me any, since you love another." "Oh, why do you not reproach me?" she cried. "I led you to believe that I loved you, and I did, until that evening. Heaven alone knows what has come over me. Before I saw him, I felt so young, and now I feel so old," she added half to herself with a shudder. "James," she went on earnestly, "listen to me. I feel I have not long to live, but before I die, let me see him again." She rose from her seat and came towards me with clasped hands and a face whose expression I can never forget. It was illuminated in ecstatic recollection, and from her dilated eyes tears fell. "Child, child, child," I cried sorrowfully, "you know not whom you love. He may be one utterly unworthy." "It is not necessary to know those we love," replied hastily through her tears. For if he be unworthy, then my love shall raise him, and if he be more than worthy, why then he will raise me. How could I argue with this sweet unreason, even though every word she spoke stabbed me to the heart? I reminded her, noticing her increased agitation, that I had promised Lady Fotheringay not to allow her to excite herself. Leading her back to her armchair, I assured her that if she left it again, I would not stay longer. I eventually succeeded in soothing her and promised that she should see the stranger again, if I could arrange it. Half an hour passed away, and then Crisp reappeared with an attendant sprite in the shape of Angela's young maid, with strict orders that Miss Angela must return to her room, as the doctor's instructions were that she must not remain up long. Of course, such infallible authority was not to be disputed, so consigning her to the old servant's hands, we parted, she to bed and I to the library. It was an even duller afternoon than the one when I had last paid a visit there. The old trees outside looked more like skeletons than ever, and the earth was melancholy and dark with the numbers of dead leaves which had fallen from them. So fall all my hopes, I thought, and the leaden sky is like my heart, and the only change it presages is winter, and deeper sorrow yet. I sat down and took up the old Bible, this time knowing full well what I did, and sought comfort and solace in King David's Psalms. Then thou shalt light my light. The Lord my God shall make my darkness to the light. I had scarcely perused this beautiful verse when a strange inner feeling told me of a presence in front of me and gazing at me. I became conscious of this even before I looked up. I knew the figure was near the mantelpiece facing me. I instinctively saw it was he, standing with his beautiful head inclining on his left hand, his elbow resting on the black marble, and holding a jewelled missal in his right hand. I felt that his eyes, with their steady light of nobility and suffering that reminded me of the martyrs of old, were upon me. A smile hovered round his sweet and gentle mouth, which yet withal seemed to express an inward agony. I knew all this long ere I raised my eyes and met his look with mine. Then it was I noticed how different the other white priest was in comparison to the one who stood before me. I allude to the tableau vivant of the white priest impersonated by Lord Walbrook. No salutation passed. We dumbly recognised each other, at least I did him, for there was something in his presence that drove all thoughts of jealousy away. There was an immeasurable distance between us, and I recognised and felt my inferiority. I was the first to break silence. I did so brutally, humanly, and to the point. Angela has seen you, and she loves you, I said. Alas, he returned in that voice I can never describe, and though the smile remained on his lips, the expression of agony was more pronounced than ever. Something told me that I should meet you here again, I went on doggedly, and I came, without any intention of asking you who you are, to beg you to see Angela. If her love is fruitless, tell her so. She is young and beautiful, and could charm an anchorite from his cell. I may not see her, and I warned you to prevent her, the young man said sadly. I am not God, I returned sternly and abruptly. She saw you without my help, and ere I could prevent her from doing so. Alas, unfortunate child, he exclaimed again in a tone of anguish that saddened me, and made me in some strange manner pity him, as much as I did my lost love. A pause ensued, during which I felt myself attracted and fascinated towards this stranger in a way impossible to account for. "I did not ask you who you are, nor from what place you come," I observed at last, and instinctively I placed my hand on the Bible with a prayer in my heart. "But tell me, can I help you in any way that you seek me out and not the others?" "I was once a man of God, even as you are now," he answered me, "but youth and folly made me break a sacred vow I had sworn never to violate. My punishment," he added, "has even been greater than my crime." There was something so awe-inspiring in his words and the manner of delivering them that I dared not ask the nature of his sin. But of one thing I felt certain. He had expiated his crime, whatever it was. His face was not that of a damned, but of a blessed soul. "Many years ago," he went on, and again I felt as though my heart and not my ears were listening to him. "As I was going out one morning, a messenger came to me and told me a young, beautiful woman was on her deathbed and wished to confess a great sin to me and receive absolution and comfort. I had promised to make one of a pleasure party. Yes, and I, a priest, refused to attend to the last dying moments of a woman and perform the rite of anointing her in her last moments. I told the messenger I would attend to her when I returned. When I did return, the woman was dead. But previous to her death, she had written her confession and sent it to me by the same messenger who advised me of her departing soul. I looked for the manuscript written by the woman's trembling hands, but in vain. I searched everywhere and inquired of the messenger where he had placed the confession. He told me that he had put it into this jewelled missal, which was laid in this room. I looked into the missal, but it was not there. Some invisible agency had taken it away, and since then I am doomed to search for it, but still have not found it. Now you know my offence and my punishment." "I shall find it for you," I said at last, in a voice so hollow that I could not recognize it as my own. "Thank you, my friend," said my companion gently, and looking at me with his mild eyes beaming with almost a divine love. I do not know how it came to pass, but I rose and went to the door, for I did not wish to see in what manner he left the apartment, and lo and behold, a light figure came to me with a cry of, "I have seen him again, and oh, how fairer than a king's son is my love." It was Angela. She laughed a light, rippling laugh, but it was terrible. Her eyes shone with a sort of fever, and her cheeks burned as though a fire consumed them. She followed me back into the library. The white priest was gone. "Why did you leave your room?" I asked, almost sternly, "and how comes it that you in your ill health should be permitted to do so?" "I sent Jeanette away," she made answer wearily, disappointed to find the stranger gone. "I sent Jeanette on an errand." "Pretended one," I interposed ruthlessly. "So be it then," she continued sadly. "I do not know why I love this man, but I love him. And loving him, I cannot exist without seeing him. God nor heaven can be angry at the pretext love makes to see those we love." Then I recollected one of Rochefoucauld's maxims as I watched the poor child in her love delirium. In their first passion, women love their lovers. In all others, they love love. I saw that her affection for me had been but a girlish fancy. If Angela thought her absence would be unnoticed for any length of time, she was mistaken. She was presently fetched away by Jeanette and Crisp, who assured me they had been searching half the castle for her. She retired with them reluctantly enough. I was no sooner left to myself than I began a search for the lost confession that my strange visitor had told me about. Filled with a vague belief that it was my lot and destiny to find the lost document, I began to look about me with unabated zeal. But cupboards, bookcase, shelves, and desks were ransacked in vain. There was no sign even of anything approaching a confession. After another hunt, equally unsuccessful, I began to give it up almost in despair, but for an unforeseen incident. In violently opening the drawer of a little desk near the oak wainscoting, my elbow came sharply in contact with what seemed to be the head of a nail. Stopping in my efforts to rub the injured arm, what was my surprise and amazement to behold that the head of the nail was really a spring, and a part, about a foot, of the wainscoting had flown open, disclosing to view a very dusty interior like a small cupboard. The castle was an old one, and at the time when it was built, centuries ago, secret doors, traps, etc. had been the fashion. These, in later years, had been fastened down, and I suppose this little one had been overlooked. With a presentiment that I had gained the object of my search, I thrust my hand into the darkness, and thence drew forth, amidst some ashes and rubbish, a roll of parchment. Regaining my composure after some moments, for the find made me giddy and trembling, I unrolled the top of the scroll. It was headed thus, word for word: Ye dying confessions of Mary, Lady Huspeth, in ye year of our Lord, A.D. 1053. I dared read no more. Curiosity before this terrible mystery retreated abashed. I know not what inexplicable and inevitable power brought me to find this manuscript. I accepted it without desiring to dive deeper into that which was beyond human power to understand. I have merely undertaken to state facts. I do not pretend to solve the occult. Crisp reminded me when I retired to my room to dress that there were to be another series of tableaux vivants that night. I had forgotten the fact. It seemed as though I were walking about in a dream. Indeed, I would have thought so since the occurrence in the library, but the parchment with the confession was real enough. I folded it and put it in my breast pocket. When I joined the company in the drawing room, my hostess anxiously inquired about my health. She remarked, "How pale and worn you look, James." I assured her my health was never better, to which she added, You mustn't worry about Angela. The doctor says she only has a protracted cold and will soon be well again. There was a larger audience than ever to witness the night's tableau. The fame of the last had spread, and all who were honoured with invitations came with alacrity. The principal feature was Lord Walbrook's impression of the White Priest. Everyone was talking about it, and now everyone of distinction, and some without any, came to witness it. Distinction came, for a wonder, early, so as not to miss this particular tableau. Distinction rustled to their places amidst a cascade of laces, perfume, and the glitter of jewels. Distinction came with a pleasurable flutter of excitement. Dying, it murmured, to see the charming man, Lord Walbrook. Distinction was not disappointed. It rarely ever is. Ruined hopes and the like are the portion more or less of the commoner herd. Distinction lifts up her dainty dress and trips lightly o'er those snares and pitfalls which her humbler brothers and sisters fall headlong into. But I digress. I am not writing a dissertation, therefore let me finish the episode, which is the saddest in my life. The room in which the tableaux were given was, as I said before, crowded to excess. It was a particularly large chamber with a gallery and a stage, and formerly kings had been entertained there. It was, in fact, the finest apartment in the castle and held upwards of 800 people. Soft music played a prelude to the tableau, and on the tiptoe of expectation, amidst a universal hush and darkness, the curtains were drawn aside and disclosed to view the figure of the white priest. There he stood in his usual pose, holding the jewelled missal, and his head gently inclined in a thoughtful attitude on his hand. Yet there was something in his face that held my heart and soul spellbound. I gave a hurried glance at the audience. Those nearest me had paled, and the laughing, glittering mass of humanity might have been dead people for the movement and sound that they emitted. It was the silence not of a listening public, but like death. The suffering on the priest's young face was strongly marked, and it seemed to me that he repressed an inward agony, even as when I had first seen him in the library. The same steady light beamed from his deep sapphire eyes, that same light of nobility and suffering which made me think of the martyrs of old. Something, I know not what, to this day seized me. Like one who walks in a dream, I found myself near the platform, and drawing forth the confession from my breast pocket, held it to the white priest. It was taken, how I know not, and my lips murmured, "Thou art not the false priest. Take this, and may the Lord remember no more the sins and offences of thy youth." And lo, a look of loving kindness swept over the stranger's face. The smile of agony was cleared away and supplanted by one such as I think the happy immortals wear, and the anguish passed away from his eyes, and he answered and said, "We shall meet again. We shall meet again in eternity," my heart responded. Just then I heard the light step of a woman and the rustle of silken lace. I looked, now bereft of the power to move or to cry out. The rustling garments and light step were Angela's. How had she come there? Who allowed her to come on the platform? I know not to this day, save that she was magnetized there as I. She moved like a beautiful somnambulist towards the figure of the young white priest. An indescribable beatitude beamed from her face, and her eyes were wide open, intense and heavenly. She appeared to be almost transparent in her etherealism. When she stood within a yard of the stranger, she stretched forth her arms as though to clasp him. Then, with a sigh like that of a grieved child, she exclaimed, still as if she were asleep, "Come. Yes, I come, oh, my beloved," and fell forward to the ground with scarce a sound, so light had she become. A noise awoke me from my stupor. I heard a voice saying, "Who has been taking my part? I've just come and found someone else has been filling it." It was Lord Walbrook, who had arrived late, dressed for the tableau vivant as the white priest. There is a grave over which stands a broken marble column, indicative of one cut off in youth and loveliness. At the base of the column is chiselled the single name of Angela. If tears and deepest sorrow could have called her back, she had been here on earth again, as fair, as sweet as ever. She sleeps undisturbed by sorrow and unavailing love, Not in the dark mausoleum of the Fotheringhays, where even death assumes a chillier aspect, but in the softer bosom of Mother Earth. Aye, softer than many hearts beating with life above it. Winter and summer, fresh flowers are placed there by loving hands, and I visit the spot even as pilgrims visit the shrines of their saints. When oppressed by the world, its vanities and vainglories, I come hither, and over the tomb of this once lovely child, learn the mutability of all things, and my heart is softened by thoughts of the past. Fortune otherwise has favoured me because, merely to forget, I worked with patience and perseverance, which led to success, as it always must. I am a bishop now, and shall go to my grave with no other recollection of a woman's love but that of Angela's. Far away I may meet her and him, as he promised me. But one word more and I am done. One warm evening in June, as I went to her grave with a bunch of white lilies, I was surprised to see an old man asleep on the ground near the base of the broken column. His face was hidden by his arm, and his hair was quite white. I knelt down by his side, intending to minister such consolation as his condition demanded and my calling and humanity gave. I could get no answer to my questions, so I gently moved his arm. It was Crisp, the old butler, and he was dead. In life divided from his fair child mistress, he thought in death to be united. Farewell. That was The White Priest by Helene Gingold. It's a tragic Victorian ghost story of the ghost needs help from the living to right a wrong genre. This story comes from a very obscure book of short stories by an obscure author. I spend a ridiculous amount of time searching for the stories that I read in an attempt to find you something you haven't heard before. I'd be enormously surprised if you've met with this one before. I couldn't find out a great deal about Helene Gingold. She was born in 1866 in London to a Jewish family. Her father was Romanian and her mother from Austria. She was married to Henry de Steddink, but the marriage ended in divorce in 1896. He was declared bankrupt in 1899 and accused of gold mining fraud and imprisoned in 1901. Her second husband was Lawrence Cowan, anglicised from Cohen, a playwright. Helene Gingold wrote poetry, novels and short stories and collaborated with her second husband in writing plays. Her obituary states she was known as Baroness Gingold at the time of her death in 1926, but I'm not entirely sure where the title came from. Her death followed a month after an operation, which was clearly not successful. I hope you enjoyed this story. If so, please remember to click the like button, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more spooky stories. And as always, thank you for listening.